Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis. Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. It is an early day for us. Court was adjourned early. Unfortunately, there was a death in Lindsay Blake's family on the prosecution team. And so they asked to adjourn early today. And then Monday, there will be no court. So condolences to Miss Blake and her family. Seems like maybe this wasn't expected. So I feel really bad for her. Real quick, give a big thank you to Laura, Lelaney, Brandy, Harry, Dr. Morgan, Suzanne Tracy, Third Rock Radio, Sharon, Angie, Adria, Patrice, and Donna and Eunice. Appreciate you guys donating and supporting this podcast. Music fact of the day, Nirvana. They got thrown out of their very own record release party for their hit record, Nevermind. Why? They started a food fight. My kind of guys right there. All right. What happened today? Well, real quick, John Pryor was there, Chad Daybell's attorney, getting a little front row into what he can expect. One thing I noticed, Lori was kind of back to her old self today, giggling with her attorneys, writing on her notepad, watching the witnesses, listening to the phone call that was played there in the courtroom. And one thing I did notice, she briefly glanced over at Charles Vallow's grown sons, her ex-stepsons. And that was when we were rising for the jury. So Detective Hermasillo was still on cross. It's kind of a bizarre cross exam to me, but we're going to go through it and you guys can let me know what you think. They talk about sifting through where Tylee's remains were found. And there were members of the FBI ERT team there with him. And Mr. Thomas asks, how long did it take before they took out the green bucket from when they started the excavation? And he said they started around in the afternoon on June the 9th, and they did not finish that burial site until the next day on the 10th. So Mr. Thomas asked, what did you do between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m.? And said he worked at JJ's burial site. After JJ was removed from the ground, he escorted JJ's remains to the morgue and came back and started working in that pet cemetery where Tylee's remains were found. He said they were only at the morgue for about 15 minutes. I'm not really sure why we're getting this breakdown of his timeline that day, but I thought it was interesting. Also, defense attorney Thomas said he's confused when Detective Hermasillo said he found teeth and bones in the fire pit. He asked if that was when he first started or later on that day or the next day. And Hermasillo said they sifted the first day and that's when they found the teeth. Hermasillo himself did not recover those teeth. And he's asked, how did you find out some teeth were found? And Detective Hermasillo said, I was on scene. And then the defense attorney Thomas asks when he left Fremont County to go to Ada County on June 10th. And he said that afternoon. He also was asked how it works when you drop a body off at the medical examiner. And the medical examiner's office knew they were coming, so they pulled into a bay and then transferred custody of the remains to them. He asks who custody was given to, and Detective Hermasillo said, I have no clue of the name, but there's paperwork with it on there. Mr. Thomas asks about JJ's burial site where the rocks were removed and those boards were recovered. If you remember, there was these flat white rocks, and then underneath that was this wood paneling. So he wanted to know if they found anything matching that on Chad's property. He said they found similar ones in Chad's garage, but it was not an exact match. So then he goes and asks about searching the townhomes. Did you find any boards at the townhomes? Detective Hermasillo reminds Mr. Thomas that search was in November of 2019 and the bodies weren't found until July of 2020. So again, Mr. Thomas asked if they found any wood in the townhomes that look similar to the ones found at JJ's burial site. And Hermasillo says, we weren't looking for that. So Mr. Thomas says, well, you're the lead investigator. Did you look at any of the photos to see if any boards were found? And Detective Hermasillo said he didn't see any in the pictures, but then again, he wasn't looking for them. So then he's asked about trace evidence collected from JJ's autopsy. Detective Hermasillo said they had to stand in the back and weren't allowed right near the body, and he couldn't answer that. So the defense attorney asked if he knows anyone who took trace evidence from JJ. And he says he doesn't know who. So that ended that cross-exam. Rob Wood was up for the state for redirect. And Mr. Wood said, you were asked about the weapons found in the garage at the townhomes and if they belonged to Lori. This was yesterday on yesterday's episode, by the way. He said he had no knowledge that those guns belonged to her. And when asked why he took photos of all the guns, Detective Hermasillo said with everything they had found at that point, it was important to document those. They were suspicious. They knew there was an attempted murder of Brandon and Tammy Daybell before she was murdered, and that's why they photographed and seized those firearms and weapons. They wanted to see if they were used in those attempted murders. Also asked why they got the warrant. Remember yesterday, Mr. Thomas was questioning why they got the warrant for the townhomes, and Detective Hermasillo said, well, Melanie Gibb didn't have JJ, so then it becomes a problem. Rob Wood talks about the tips that they received that the defense brought up. The defense was asking about following up on tips. And Detective Hermasillo said that they had a hotline, and as tips came in, it would go on a tip sheet. If they gave their name and a brief description, that was what was on that tip sheet. That would be assigned to an officer who would follow up. Detective Hermasillo said none of the tips aided with finding JJ and Tylee. And Rob Wood said, essentially, the defense said you didn't follow up on all the tips. And Detective Hermasillo said some of the tips were from psychics. Some were photos that weren't JJ and Tylee. Some people didn't respond when they called back. And there was no evidence that Tylee and JJ were alive after the date they were last seen. What defense attorney Thomas did was essentially kind of say, you didn't follow up on all the tips that were called in about JJ and Tylee. And what he was insinuating is, if you didn't follow up on those tips, is it possible JJ and Tylee were alive after the dates they were last confirmed to be alive? It was kind of a throw something against the wall moment for me, because we know that JJ and Tylee's bodies were found using the Google data on Alex Cox's phone, which led investigators to both burial sites. I'm not sure why this is even being touched upon, but it was. I really don't think the defense has much to work with here, y'all. She's not allowing mental illness in as part of her defense. There's clearly going to be a lot of evidence pointing to the conspiracy itself, although they say it's circumstantial. We'll see, but I haven't seen any impressive cross-exam of any of these witnesses so far. There's just not a whole lot they can dispute at this point. So Detective Hermasillo was then asked about how they sifted through the fire pit area. He said someone would scoop dirt and then someone would sift it. They had a tarp underneath, and so anything that was too big to go through the sifter was examined. In doing that, they found teeth, charred bones, and flesh. They would call over the photographer. Once those items were found, they would log it, and then it would be entered into evidence. So when redirect was over, Mr. Thomas asked the judge if he can recross because he wants to go over some things. Then he said there was an attempted homicide on October 9th, which was Tammy Daybell. And Mr. Thomas says there's no evidence of an attempted homicide on October the 9th. Thomas said Tammy Daybell thought it was a paintball gun, and you never found any casings or bullets. And Detective Hermasillo said that was Fremont County, so I didn't. That is kind of crazy. Tammy made a police report about that. And we know that they have some cell phone pings of Alex riding by that house that day. I just thought it was an interesting way to go. Just because Tammy thought it was a paintball gun didn't mean it was a paintball gun. It means, unfortunately, Alex, the only person he shot and killed was Charles Vallow, and that's because he was right up on him, apparently. And fortunately, Alex is a crap shot when he's more than a few feet away, because Brandon's alive, and it did not kill Tammy Daybell that night. We know 10 days later, Chad allegedly murdered her. Next up was Lieutenant Jared Wilmore. He works at the Madison County Jail. That's where Lori stays when she's not on trial. And he talks about the Telmate system, which is the tablets that we've discussed on prior episodes that allows inmates to make voice calls and video calls to friends and family on the outside. Each inmate has to enter their unique PIN number, and the tablets also have facial recognition to be sure other inmates aren't using a tablet that doesn't belong to them. Each call or visit, whether it's voice or video, it's recorded. So the outside party participating in the call is required to identify themselves, and the witness has access to all video visits. This guy has all of them. And any call that inmates make, he can't edit them. There's nobody that can go in and edit these video visits or audio calls. The tablets are located in the day room of the jail where she's at. So each caller video is also time-stamped at the time of the call. And the witness is handed a small thumb drive from June 9th, 2020 between Chad and Lori. That's the phone call that was made the day the kids' bodies were found. And so they play the phone call. And it's just Chad saying they're searching the property. Lori's like, are they seizing stuff? Are they in the house? And Chad's essentially like, they're on the property. He's trying to say, woman, game's over. I'm busted. But she didn't get the memo. It goes on. She asks what she can do for him. And he says, pray. He says he's going to talk to Mark Means, who was his attorney at the time. And that was kind of it. It's out there. I'll post that on the website later today. They also introduce a video call on June 24th, 2020 between Lori and her sister Summer. Now, I don't think that this will come in until maybe Summer's on the stand, but given that this guy's over the Telmate system, he had to introduce this evidence. I really thought we were about to hear some stuff today or see some videos, but we didn't. It's coming though. The third exhibit was a video visit between Lori and her son, Colby. That was on August 3rd, 2020. I think maybe what those are going to do for the state is Lori is going to say she knows where the kids are. They're fine. And that kind of thing. That's all I can kind of think. The next witness was Joe Powell. And a lot of this dealt with Tammy Daybell's body being exhumed. On October 31st, they were notified they were investigating Tammy's death, which is not long after she was murdered, just less than 2 weeks. My math stinks, but she died on the 19th. This is the 31st. Lori, Alex, and Chad Daybell were mentioned in this investigation, and he was initially tasked with looking for that Jeep Wrangler that was used in the attempt on Brandon. That was located on November 4th, and the whole time they're doing this, Mr. Thomas is objecting and he's getting overruled. They move on to Tammy Daybell. They ultimately decide to exhume because she had no major medical issues. And also, Chad's 2 weeks later walking around holding hands with Lori. So she was buried in Utah, and they got a judge to sign off on her body being exhumed. And he was there when her body was exhumed. So they show photos of the process of exhuming her. And it shows the grave, and you see a photo of a backhoe waiting beside that grave. Picture number 2 shows the backhoe digging the grave up. Photo 3 showed the vault being lifted out of the ground. So when you're buried, if you don't know this, you're in a coffin, then you're in a vault that is supposed to protect it from water. Fourth photo showed the vault being lifted out of the hole. Photo 4 showed the top of the casket, and then photo 5 showed inside the bottom part of the empty vault. Photo 6, you can see the casket being loaded into a hearse. You could also still see flowers that people threw in before they left the service. And they were on the coffin and then on the floor of the vault. I'm sure as it was moved, they probably fell over it. He was able to identify Tammy visually just from her photos. Her picture of her on the autopsy table, she looked absolutely peaceful, like she was sleeping. There was no decomposition, and there was nothing disturbing about the photo except for knowing what happened to her physically. It was as if she was just sound asleep. He was present at the autopsy, and after the autopsy, she was taken to the funeral home and prepared for reburial. They got a search warrant for Chad's home on January 3rd of 2020. Items found were turned over to the witness by the FBI ERT team. So the FBI was assisting in that, and then they turned the evidence they found over to this witness. Mr. Thomas came up for cross-exam. He's asked about the search warrant at the townhomes, and he wasn't active in that. He did, however, get a search warrant to identify whose names were on the leases for those townhomes. He followed Chad and Lori from the townhomes for surveillance. He was doing a stakeout, essentially. That's what Mr. Thomas said. Were you doing a stakeout? And the guy was like, yeah, pretty much. And he followed them to Idaho Falls. Other detectives were with him when they were doing this surveillance. They showed a couple of pictures, one of Chad and Lori holding hands walking into a Hobby Lobby, and the other, they are sitting across from each other at a restaurant. And they were sitting a seat. So there was a table in between Lori and Chad and these investigators. They couldn't overhear the conversation, but they did get that picture. Mr. Thomas also asked the witness if he's aware of where Lori was when Tammy Daybell died. The witness says, nope. He says, would it surprise you to know she was in Hawaii? And the witness says, no, wouldn't surprise me. So that was the end of testimony. We went on morning break, but when we got back from break was when they dismissed us for the day. So a very short day. The rest of the week should be regular schedule. I'm not sure who's going to be testifying. It seems like maybe we're getting into the investigators, FBI people. I also wonder if maybe this week we'll hear from the pathologist who did the autopsy on JJ. I know Tylee's remains were in such bad shape, they ended up, and I believe, had to send her remains somewhere else. So I don't think we'll get a cause of death for Tylee. We know that Tammy Daybell was asphyxiated. It seems like it's going to be suffocation or some of the same for JJ. So I don't think we'll get a cause of death for Tylee, because if you remember last week during jury selection, they were consistently asking each group, can you convict without a cause of death? And they said they could. So that's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow to bring you the latest. We should have a full day of testimony. Otherwise, Lori was just Lori, normal Lori today, I guess, is the best way to put it. She didn't seem stressed, nothing major behavior-wise, just kind of what I've seen for the last 8 days now. Anyways, tonight I'll be on Chris Cuomo's show and then Banfield. So join me there, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Hope you have a great one.